The enormous starship Aurora's Hope glided through the vast emptiness of space, its polished hull reflecting the light of a distant sun. Inside, the human delegation prepared themselves for the historic meeting with the Valtheri, one of the most feared and respected warrior races in the galaxy. Daniel Hayes adjusted the collar of his diplomatic uniform, exhaling slowly. He had read countless reports about the Valtheri before this mission. They were strong, disciplined, and had a strict code of honor. No alien species had ever managed to form a close alliance with them. Other races either feared them or kept interactions strictly professional. As the ship approached the planet Valtheris, Daniel looked through the viewport. The planet was breathtaking. Vast mountain ranges stretched across its surface, and silver-blue rivers carved through dense, emerald-green forests. Giant, metallic cities stood proudly like fortresses, built for both beauty and defense. This was a world where only the strong thrived. The ship's AI announced, "Final approach initiated. Prepare for landing." Daniel glanced at his fellow diplomats, men and women in formal attire, most of them tense. The Valtheri were unpredictable. If offended, they could end diplomatic talks in an instant. If impressed, they could become powerful allies. The ship touched down on a massive landing platform. As the doors opened, Daniel stepped out into the cool Valtherian air. Before them stood a welcoming party of Valtheri warriors. They were tall, averaging nearly 7 feet, with lean, muscular builds. Their features were striking: sharp cheekbones, piercing golden eyes, and long, flowing hair that shimmered like woven silver. Their armor, sleek yet battle-worn, glowed faintly with energy shields. Each warrior carried a weapon, not as a threat, but as a symbol of their strength. A figure stepped forward, and the human delegation instinctively stiffened. It was Commander Zilara, one of the most respected warriors in the Valtheri military. She was taller than most of her kind, her presence both commanding and elegant. A long scar ran across her cheek, a mark of battle, not shame. Zilara studied the humans with a calculating gaze before speaking. "Welcome to Valtheris, humans. You may follow me." Her voice was smooth yet carried an edge of authority. The human delegation followed her into the grand halls of the Valtheri capital. The halls were built from polished stone and dark metal, with intricate carvings depicting ancient battles and victories. Everything about this place spoke of strength, tradition, and discipline. As they walked, Daniel couldn't help but notice how other alien races reacted to the Valtheri. The few non-humans present, a delegation from the Trelvans, and a small group of traders, kept their distance. It was clear that most species admired the Valtheri from afar, but never dared to get too close. Humans, however, were different. They weren't here just to observe or negotiate trade deals. They wanted something more, a true connection. As they entered the main chamber, the high-ranking Valtheri warriors stood in a semicircle, observing the humans with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild disinterest. Zilara turned to face the group. "You have come to discuss an alliance, but words alone do not impress the Valtheri. We value action, strength, and loyalty. What makes humans worthy of our respect?" Most of the diplomats hesitated, choosing their words carefully. A senior ambassador spoke about mutual benefits, trade, technology exchange, and strategic cooperation. The Valtheri listened, but their expressions remained unreadable. Daniel, however, was more interested in their reactions than the speech itself. These warriors lived by a different code. They didn't want empty promises. They wanted to see what humans were truly made of. After the speech ended, Zilara looked unimpressed. "We have heard such words before," she said. "And yet, no species has ever truly stood beside us. They admire from a distance, afraid to engage. Are humans any different?" A tense silence filled the room. The other diplomats exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to say the wrong thing. Daniel, however, stepped forward slightly. "We wouldn't be here if we were afraid," he said, meeting Zilara's gaze. "Humans don't just seek alliances, we seek understanding." Zilara's golden eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a flicker of interest. Understanding, she repeated. Daniel nodded. Many see the Valtheri as warriors and nothing more, but I think there's more to your people than just strength. Strength alone does not build a civilization like this. He gestured toward the grand hall, the intricate carvings, the disciplined warriors who stood with quiet pride. There is honor, tradition, and something deeper, a way of life. We want to learn, not just negotiate. For the first time, a few of the Valtheri warriors exchanged glances, as if considering his words. Zilara studied Daniel carefully before speaking. Words are easy. We shall see if your actions match them. With that, the meeting ended, and the human delegation was escorted to their quarters. As Daniel walked through the halls, he felt the weight of what had just happened. This was not going to be an easy mission. The Valtheri did not open up easily, and earning their respect would take more than just diplomacy. But something in Zilara's gaze told him that, for the first time, a human had caught the attention of the warrior race. And that was a start. The halls of the Valtheri capital were vast, built from dark metal and polished stone, decorated with glowing blue engravings of past battles. The air carried the faint scent of burning incense, a reminder of the warrior culture that filled every corner of this place. Daniel walked beside his fellow diplomats, but his focus was on the towering figures of the Valtheri around them. They stood like living statues, their golden eyes watching the humans with expressions that revealed little emotion. It was clear the Valtheri did not fully trust them yet. The human delegation had been escorted to their quarters, a series of guest chambers inside a fortress-like structure. The rooms were comfortable but simple, without unnecessary luxury. The Valtheri valued function over extravagance. As soon as the delegation settled, the senior ambassador, a man named Caldwell, gathered them for a private discussion. "We need to be careful," Caldwell said, his voice low. "The Valtheri are testing us. They don't trust outsiders easily. We must remain respectful and avoid any mistakes." Most of the diplomats nodded in agreement, but Daniel wasn't just thinking about politics. He was thinking about the Valtheri themselves. They were seen as cold and unapproachable, but Daniel could tell there was more beneath the surface. There had to be. A society built only on battle and strength would not survive this long. There was something deeper, something no other species had taken the time to understand. And that intrigued him. A warrior's gaze. Later that evening, the delegation was invited to a formal gathering, a banquet held in one of the great halls of the capital. The hall was massive, its ceiling lined with banners displaying symbols of ancient Valtheri clans. Long metal tables stretched across the room, filled with a variety of dishes. The food was unfamiliar to the humans: roasted meats with deep purple textures, glowing blue fruits, and thick golden drinks served in heavy cups. The Valtheri warriors sat together, speaking in their own language, their voices deep and commanding. The few non-Valtheri guests in the hall, mostly traders and ambassadors from other species, kept to themselves, avoiding direct interaction with the warriors. Daniel, however, observed the room carefully. His eyes landed on Commander Zilara. She sat among the high-ranking warriors, her expression calm but unreadable. Despite her composed demeanor, there was something different about her compared to the others. Unlike many of her kind, she wasn't just ignoring the humans, she was watching them. Her golden eyes briefly met Daniel's, and for a moment, there was silence between them. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. It was something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Before Daniel could think further, an unexpected event caught his attention. The unspoken challenge. One of the human diplomats, a younger man named Russell, accidentally bumped into a Valtheri warrior while reaching for a drink. The warrior turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Watch yourself, human." Russell immediately raised his hands in apology. "I didn't mean." "Excuses are meaningless," the warrior interrupted, his voice firm. "Among my kind, if one challenges another, they must stand their ground." The hall grew quiet. The other warriors stopped their conversations, turning their attention to the unfolding situation. Even Zilara watched with mild interest. Russell's face turned pale. "I wasn't challenging you." "Then you should be more careful," the warrior said, stepping closer. The tension in the room thickened. Humans weren't weak, but they were physically outmatched by the Valthari. If this escalated, it could end badly for Russell. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward. "There's no need for this," Daniel said, his voice steady. The warrior's gaze shifted to him. "And who are you to interfere?" "Just someone who understands that strength isn't measured by how quickly you take offense," Daniel replied. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then, to Daniel's surprise, the warrior let out a deep chuckle. "You speak boldly for a human," he said. "Perhaps you are not as weak as others think." The situation diffused, and the warriors returned to their conversations. Russell quickly retreated to his seat, still shaken. But Daniel felt something shift. For the first time, the Valthari had truly noticed a human, not as an outsider, but as someone willing to engage with them directly. A warrior's respect. As the banquet continued, Zilara approached Daniel. "That was risky," she said, standing beside him. Daniel glanced at her. "Maybe. But I don't believe in avoiding people just because they seem unapproachable." Zilara studied him for a moment. "Most species keep their distance from us. They fear that we do not tolerate weakness." "I don't see it as weakness," Daniel replied. "I see it as understanding. Strength is more than just physical power." Zilara was silent for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Perhaps," she said simply. Then, with one last glance at him, she walked away. Daniel exhaled, realizing that, for the first time, he had caught the attention of the Valthari commander. And maybe, just maybe, he had taken the first step towards something greater. The night air on Valtharis was crisp, carrying the distant hum of energy shields and the faint clang of warriors training in the distance. The grand banquet had ended, but Daniel Hayes found himself standing on the fortress balcony, staring at the twin moons above. His mind replayed the events of the evening. The Valthari were not as closed off as others believed. They simply had a different way of understanding the world. Strength wasn't just about fighting. It was about presence, about proving yourself in ways that words could not. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You stood up for your fellow human today." Daniel turned to see Commander Zilara standing a few steps away. The moonlight reflected off her silver hair, making her look almost ethereal. "He didn't deserve to be humiliated over an accident," Daniel replied. Zilara stepped closer, folding her arms. And yet, many species would not have interfered. They would have let fear keep them silent. Daniel met her gaze. Humans don't believe in staying silent when something isn't right. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, passed through her golden eyes. "Interesting," she murmured. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "The Valthari value strength. But strength does not always mean battle. It means standing firm, even when others would step back." Daniel nodded. "I understand that." Zilara studied him for a moment, then took a step forward. "Then let's see if you truly do." Before Daniel could ask what she meant, she gestured toward the training grounds below the balcony. A group of Valthari warriors were engaged in sparring matches, their weapons clashing under the glow of artificial lights. "A challenge," she said. "A test of resolve." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You want me to fight a Valthari?" Zilara smirked. "Not exactly. A simple trial of endurance. A warrior's challenge. If you are as fearless as you claim, then prove it." Daniel hesitated, then exhaled. He had come here to understand the Valthari, and that meant stepping into their world. "All right," he said. "I accept." The warrior's trial. The training grounds were a vast arena of smooth stone, surrounded by towering metallic walls. A dozen warriors watched as Daniel stepped forward, some whispering among themselves. Humans had never participated in Valthari training before. Zilara stood beside him, explaining the challenge. "It is not about winning," she said. "It is about how long you can endure." Daniel nodded. He had no illusions about victory. He was facing warriors who had trained since childhood. But endurance, that he could manage. A warrior stepped forward, a male named Varish, his stance firm and ready. "I will test you, human," he said. The challenge began. Varish moved fast, faster than Daniel expected. A controlled strike with a wooden staff came toward him, and he barely dodged in time. Another strike followed, hitting his arm with enough force to make him stumble. The watching Valtheri chuckled. "Too fragile," one of them muttered. Daniel gritted his teeth and straightened. "No, not fragile." Varish attacked again, and this time Daniel blocked, though the impact sent a sharp pain through his hands. He absorbed the next few blows, refusing to fall. He wasn't strong like the Valthari, but he could last. He could endure. Minutes passed. His breathing became heavy, his muscles ached, but he didn't back down. The murmurs in the crowd changed from amusement to interest. Then Varish struck his leg, and Daniel collapsed to one knee. A moment of silence. Then, instead of staying down, Daniel pushed himself back up, refusing to surrender. Varish hesitated, then lowered his staff. He turned to Zilara and gave a slight nod. "He does not quit easily," he admitted. Zilara looked at Daniel, her expression unreadable. Then, with a simple motion, she ended the challenge. "Enough," she said. "You have proven your point." Daniel, gasping for breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead. He had lost, but in the eyes of the Valtheri, he had done something far more important. He had earned their respect. A shift in perspective. As Daniel sat on a nearby bench, catching his breath, he noticed that the warriors no longer looked at him with indifference. Some even gave approving nods. Zilara approached, offering him a metal cup filled with a cool herbal drink. "You did better than most expected," she said. Daniel accepted the drink, taking the slow sip. The bitterness made him wince, but it helped ease the pain in his muscles. "I doubt I impressed anyone," he said. Zilara smirked. "You endured. That is what matters." She sat beside him, her golden eyes watching the other warriors train. "Many species admire us, but fear to engage with us. They keep their distance. But you stepped forward when others would have retreated. That is rare." Daniel chuckled. "Humans have a habit of doing things others don't expect." Zilara was silent for a moment before speaking again. "Perhaps that is why I find you interesting." Daniel turned to her, surprised. "Interesting." She nodded. "We are a warrior race, but we are more than just our battles. Yet no one has ever tried to truly understand us, until now." Daniel felt a small sense of satisfaction. This was what he had wanted, to bridge the gap between their species, to break past the walls of fear and form something real. And maybe, just maybe, he had taken the first real step. The next morning, Daniel awoke to the sound of distant drills, the rhythmic clash of weapons, the sharp commands of instructors, and the disciplined footfalls of Valtheri warriors training at dawn. His body ached from the endurance trial the night before, but he forced himself to get up. This mission wasn't about comfort. It was about proving that humans were more than just observers. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air greeted him. The sun was rising over Valtheris, painting the sky with shades of gold and violet. The capital's towering spires shimmered in the light, and in the distance, the vast mountains stood like silent guardians. Daniel knew that today would be different. He wasn't just a guest anymore. The Valtheri were starting to notice him, a different kind of strength. Daniel made his way to the training grounds, where warriors were already engaged in combat practice. The same warriors who had watched his trial the night before now glanced at him with something other than amusement, curiosity. A few gave him nods of acknowledgement. Others observed him quietly. Commander Zilara stood near the center of the training area, speaking with a few high-ranking warriors. When she saw Daniel, she dismissed them with a simple gesture and approached. You're awake early, she noted. Daniel stretched his sore arms. Figured I'd see more of how the Valtheri train. Zilara smirked. Are you looking for another beating? Daniel chuckled. Not today. Just watching. Zilara studied him for a moment before nodding. Then come. She led him toward an open area where two warriors sparred with precision and speed. Their movements were almost too fast for the human eye to follow, their strikes controlled but powerful. As Daniel watched, he realized something. The Valtheri weren't just about brute force. Their combat was like an art form, fluid, disciplined, almost like a dance of war. Zilara noticed his expression. Strength is not just in the body, but in the mind and spirit, she said. A warrior who fights without discipline is nothing but a wild beast. Daniel nodded. Humans have a saying. Strength without control is just recklessness. Zilara gave him an approving glance. Perhaps you understand us better than I thought. For the first time, Daniel felt like he wasn't just speaking to a warrior. He was speaking to someone who saw more than just battles and duty. And maybe, just maybe, Zilara was starting to see the same in him. An unusual invitation. Later that afternoon, Daniel was surprised when a young Valtheri messenger arrived at his quarters. Commander Zilara has requested your presence, the messenger said. Daniel frowned. For what? She did not say, but she is waiting outside the fortress. Curious, Daniel followed the messenger through the capital. They passed towering statues of ancient warriors, great halls filled with glowing energy orbs, and narrow paths that wound through towering metallic structures. When they finally reached the outer walls, Daniel saw Zilara standing beside two sleek, hover-capable vehicles. We are going for a hunt, she said simply. Daniel blinked. A hunt? Zilara nodded. You said you wanted to understand the Valtheri, then see how we survive. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before nodding. All right, let's go. Zilara smirked. Try to keep up. Into the wilds. The hover vehicles sped across the landscape, leaving the city behind. The terrain changed from polished metal streets to wild, open plains where massive trees stretched toward the sky. Zilara navigated effortlessly, her movements confident and sure. Daniel, on the other hand, was still adjusting to the controls. The vehicle was fast, too fast, but he forced himself to focus. They finally stopped near a rocky ridge, where the land sloped downward into a dense jungle. Zilara stepped out, grabbing a sleek, rifle-like weapon from her vehicle. We hunt a Revok, she explained, a beast that moves swiftly and strikes without warning. It is a rite of passage for young warriors. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And you brought me along because... Zilara's smirk returned. Because I want to see what you will do. Daniel exhaled. Great. No pressure. The hunt begins. The jungle was thick, filled with strange glowing plants and the distant sounds of unseen creatures. Zilara moved like a shadow, her every step controlled and silent. Daniel did his best to keep up, but the terrain was rough, and every branch he stepped on seemed determined to betray his presence. Zilara glanced back. Your movements are loud, human. Daniel sighed. We can't all be silent warriors. She shook her head, amused, but said nothing more. Suddenly, she froze. Her golden eyes sharpened. It is here, she whispered. Daniel followed her gaze. In the distance, a Ravok emerged from the shadows. It was a massive panther-like beast with dark blue scales and glowing yellow eyes. It moved with terrifying speed, circling them like a predator playing with its prey. Zilara slowly raised her weapon. Wait, Daniel whispered. Zilara gave him a sharp look. What? Daniel studied the Revok's movements. It's testing us. It's not attacking yet. Zilara hesitated. Explain. In human history, predators don't always attack right away. Sometimes they watch. They wait to see if their prey is weak. Asterisk. Zilara narrowed her eyes. Then what do you suggest? Daniel slowly picked up a nearby branch and threw it toward the beast, not as an attack, but as a distraction. The Ravok flinched, confused by the unexpected move. Zillara took the opportunity. She moved with lightning speed, firing a single shot. The energy bolt struck the Ravok's side, and with a final snarl, the beast collapsed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zillara turned to Daniel with something close to admiration. "That was clever," she admitted. "Most warriors would have attacked blindly." Daniel exhaled. "Humans have a habit of thinking differently." Zillara nodded. "And that may be why you intrigue me." Daniel met her gaze, sensing something shift between them. This wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about something deeper. The jungle was silent once more, the defeated Ravok lying still among the glowing foliage. Its dark blue scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, its massive form now lifeless. Daniel exhaled, still feeling the tension in his body from the brief but intense encounter. The creature had been fast, dangerous, but not invincible, and he had helped take it down. Commander Zillara stood beside him, her rifle still in hand, but instead of looking at the fallen beast, she was watching him. "You are different from other humans," she said at last. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Because I didn't panic." Zillara shook her head. "No, because you think before you act. Most warriors, even among my kind, would have charged in without hesitation. But you?" She paused, considering her words. "You read the situation. You understood the Ravok before it struck." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Sometimes the best way to win isn't to be the strongest, but to be the smartest." Zillara smirked. "Perhaps there is wisdom in that." She knelt beside the Ravok and carefully cut a small piece of its scaled hide with a blade from her belt. Then, standing, she handed it to Daniel. "Take this." Daniel frowned, accepting the small but tough patch of Ravok hide. "What for?" "Among the Valthari, when a warrior participates in a hunt, they take a piece of their kill as a mark of their trial." Zilara's golden eyes met his. "Consider it proof that today you fought beside one of us." Daniel turned the rough piece of hide over in his hands. It wasn't much, just a small token, but he understood the meaning behind it. This wasn't just a hunt. This was the beginning of something deeper, a different kind of strength. They made their way back to the hover vehicles, the jungle fading behind them as they sped across the open plains. The city soon came into view, a fortress of metal and stone, rising like a monument to strength. As they approached the main gates, several warriors turned to watch them. Some narrowed their eyes at Daniel, but others, especially those who had seen his trial the night before, gave small nods of acknowledgement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Zillara led him inside, walking with purpose. "There is one more thing," she said as they reached the upper levels of the fortress. "Something I wish to show you." Daniel followed her through a long corridor, the walls engraved with glowing symbols, battle records, victories of past warriors. At the end of the hallway, a massive door slid open, revealing a vast training hall. Inside, a group of warriors sparred with long energy staffs, their movements precise and powerful. The sounds of combat echoed across the room, but as soon as Zillara stepped inside, all activity stopped. The warriors turned toward her, toward them. Zilara's voice was steady. "This human fought beside me today. He has earned the right to stand among us." A murmur spread through the group. Some looked skeptical. Others seemed impressed. Daniel swallowed. This was another test. One warrior, a tall and broad-shouldered male, stepped forward. "A human. Among us." He scoffed. "We have fought wars for generations. What could he possibly know of battle?" Zillara tilted her head slightly. "You doubt him, Varish." Varish crossed his arms. "A single hunt does not make him one of us." Zillara smirked. "Then perhaps you should see for yourself." Daniel sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." The warrior's trial, again. A training circle was cleared in the center of the hall. The gathered warriors formed a wide ring around Daniel and Varish. Zilara turned to Daniel. "You do not need to win. You only need to stand your ground." Daniel rolled his shoulders, still sore from the last fight. "That seems to be a theme with you." Varish smirked. "Try not to embarrass yourself, human." Daniel took a deep breath. No weapons, no tricks, just skill and endurance. The fight began. Varish moved first, fast, but controlled. A quick step forward, a sweeping kick. Daniel barely dodged in time, rolling to the side. The crowd watched with sharp eyes, whispering among themselves. Daniel adjusted his stance. Stay low. Move fast. Use his strength against him. Varish attacked again, throwing a powerful strike toward Daniel's chest. Instead of blocking, Daniel shifted his weight and redirected the force, sidestepping and pushing Varish's arm away. Varish's eyes flickered with surprise. The watching warriors murmured louder. Daniel smirked. "Not bad, right?" Varish growled and pressed forward again. This time, Daniel wasn't fast enough. A sharp strike hit his shoulder, sending pain through his arm. He stumbled but didn't fall. He wouldn't fall. The fight continued. Blow after blow, dodge after dodge. Daniel wasn't winning, but he wasn't losing either. And that, he knew, was what really mattered. Respect earned. After several long minutes, Zilara finally raised her hand. Enough. Varish stepped back, breathing hard. He studied Daniel for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "You fight with more than strength. You fight with thought. I respect that." Daniel exhaled. Finally, Zilara smirked. "You have done well, human." The other warriors, even those who had doubted him, gave small nods of approval. It wasn't open acceptance, but it was enough. As Daniel stood there, catching his breath, he realized something. This wasn't just about proving himself. This was about breaking barriers, about showing that humans could stand alongside the Valthari, not as outsiders, but as equals. And in that moment, he knew he was one step closer. The air inside the training hall was thick with energy. The fight between Daniel and Varish had ended, but the tension lingered. Daniel stood with his hands on his knees, breathing heavily. His body ached, but he was still standing. And that meant something. Varish studied him for a long moment before stepping forward. "You are not weak, human," he admitted. It wasn't an apology, but it didn't need to be. Varish extended his arm, offering a warrior's handshake, a firm grip of the forearm. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before accepting. It wasn't just a handshake, it was respect. Around them, the other Valthari warriors watched in silence. Some still seemed uncertain, but others nodded in quiet approval. Zilara stepped beside him, arms crossed. "You lasted longer than I expected." Daniel chuckled. "So did I." A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Come, there is still much for you to learn." The warriors feast. That evening, the fortress was filled with a different kind of energy. The warriors gathered in one of the great halls, where long tables were lined with food, meats from hunted creatures, glowing fruits, and drinks that smelled both sweet and strong. Daniel sat beside Zilara, feeling a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. He had earned his place, at least for now. The warriors ate, laughed, and shared stories of past battles. Some of them still cast glances at him, but they were no longer filled with doubt. Varish sat across from him, cutting into a large piece of roasted meat. "You move differently from us," he noted. "Not as strong, not as fast, but precise." Daniel chewed on a strange but surprisingly delicious fruit. Humans had to adapt. We weren't the strongest on our own world, so we had to think fast. Use what we had. Zilara nodded. Survival through strategy. A different kind of warrior. Daniel smiled. Something like that. A different kind of battle. As the feast continued, the atmosphere grew more relaxed. The warriors exchanged stories, some boasting of past victories, others teasing their comrades about old mistakes. Then one warrior, a female with dark blue markings on her arms, leaned forward. "Tell us, human, what battles have you fought?" Daniel hesitated. Compared to the Valthari, what had he really faced? He set down his cup. "I haven't fought in great wars like you, but humans have our own struggles. Sometimes our battles aren't fought with weapons." Varich frowned. "Then what do you fight with?" Daniel leaned back. "Words, ideas, the will to stand when others fall." The warriors exchanged glances. Zilara, however, studied him with interest. "Explain." Daniel thought for a moment. "Where I come from, war isn't always the answer. Sometimes the greatest victories come from knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Varish scoffed. "Walking away is weakness." Daniel shook his head. "Not always. A true warrior knows which battles are worth fighting. Sometimes winning means finding another way." Silence followed. The warriors weren't used to this kind of thinking, but Zilara's expression didn't change. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Perhaps humans are more than we believed." Daniel smirked. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Zilara chuckled, a rare sound from her. "Perhaps." The knight's test. As the feast ended, Zilara stood and motioned for Daniel to follow. He did, stepping outside onto one of the fortress balconies. From here, the city stretched before them, a glowing marvel of both ancient and advanced technology. The twin moons of Valtharis hung high in the sky, casting a silver light over the land. Zilara leaned against the railing. "Do you know why I allowed you to stay?" Daniel folded his arms. "Because I didn't quit." She shook her head. "Many do not quit. Strength alone is not enough. You are different, and I wanted to see why." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" Zilara turned her golden eyes toward him. "I think I have not yet decided." There was something in her gaze, something he hadn't seen before. Curiosity, respect, maybe something more. She exhaled softly. "The Valthari do not trust easily. We have fought too many wars, seen too many betrayals. But you..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You may not be Valthari, but you are not just a stranger anymore." Daniel gave a small smile. "That's a start." Zilara nodded. "Yes, it is." For the first time, the distance between them didn't seem so vast. And in that moment, Daniel knew. He had earned something far more valuable than victory. He had earned trust. The fortress stood silent under the twin moons of Valtharis. The feast had ended. The warriors had returned to their quarters, but Daniel found himself unable to sleep. He stood at the edge of one of the fortress balconies, staring out at the vast land beyond. The jungle stretched in one direction, the great plains in another. Somewhere out there, dangers lurked. Creatures like the Ravok, rival clans, unseen threats. But here, in this moment, the biggest challenge wasn't out there. It was inside the fortress walls. Had he truly earned his place? Footsteps approached from behind. He turned to see Zilara, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You are troubled." Daniel gave a small smile. "Just thinking." Zilara stepped beside him, resting her arms on the railing. "You have fought well. You have endured the trials. And yet, you still doubt." He let out a breath. "It's not just about fighting, is it? Winning a battle doesn't mean I belong here." Zilara was silent for a moment. Then she turned to face him. "There is one final test." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Another fight." She smirked. "Not this time. Follow me." The choice of a warrior. Zilara led him through the fortress, down stone hallways lined with glowing battle records. They reached a large circular chamber where several warriors already stood waiting. Varich was there, along with a few others Daniel recognized from the training hall. The air was thick with expectation. At the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, lay two objects. A Valthari warrior's blade, ornate, sharp, the mark of a true fighter, and a small metal insignia, shaped like the crest of the Valtheri people. Zilara stepped forward and gestured to them. "You must choose." Daniel frowned. "Choose what?" Varish crossed his arms. "A Valtheri warrior must always know their purpose. Do you seek the path of strength or the path of trust?" Zilara explained. "The blade represents a warrior's life, a path of battle, proving your strength through combat. The insignia represents a path of unity, earning your place not by force, but by standing beside us in loyalty and wisdom." Daniel stared at the two objects, a simple choice, but one that held deep meaning. If he chose the blade, he would be seen as a warrior, one who fought alongside the Valtheri in battle. If he chose the insignia, he would be something else, a bridge between humans and the Valtheri, a sign that strength was not just about war, but about trust. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, slowly, he reached forward and picked up the insignia. Respect earned, a bond forged. The warriors murmured among themselves. Some nodded in understanding. Others looked surprised. Varish studied him for a moment before speaking. "Interesting choice." Daniel turned the insignia in his hand. "I didn't come here to just fight. Strength isn't just about how hard you can hit. It's about standing together." Zilara's eyes softened slightly. A wise decision. She turned to the others. "Let it be known, this human has proven himself. He is not just a guest. He is one of us." The warriors let out a collective warrior's salute, slamming their fists against their chests. Daniel let out a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just acceptance. This was belonging. A new beginning. Later that night, Daniel stood once more on the balcony, the insignia resting in his palm. Zilara approached again, her expression unreadable. "You have surprised me, human." He smirked. "I tend to do that." She chuckled softly. "Perhaps." For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "The Valtheri are proud. We do not trust easily. But you have changed something here." Daniel met her gaze. "Maybe trust isn't about being the strongest. Maybe it's about being willing to stand beside someone, even when things get hard." Zilara studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod. "Yes, perhaps it is." And as the twin moons shone above them, Daniel realized. This was only the beginning of a bond between two different species, a bond built not by force, but by trust. And that was a victory greater than any battle.